over 30 years ago when I began the women's group in San Francisco. It was recommended by my teacher in Taiwan that I separate the women out from the men because the women had a different training. After he passed at the age of 96 in the year 2000, began to really wake up to what he had imparted to me over those 23 years. What I keyed in on was, why was he so preoccupied or even obsessed with the women of our lineage? There was Gong Baotian, who was the famous last bodyguard of the Empress Dowager, who was trained actually in the imperial palace by Yin Fu, second generation of Bagua Tren. While Gong Baotian was away in the palace, his wife and 5 children were training in the village, and they had set up a school and were teaching in this village of Green Mountain, Qingshan, in Shandong province. So the wife, it was an interesting marriage, was already well trained from her father, and it was an arranged marriage. So it was a power relationship where both came together with the pact of Gong Baotian sharing the system with his wife, who was already a master of martial arts, and then passing it on to the 5 children and other lineage people. As it turns out, one of the daughters, Gong Chaoying, we can call her, was extraordinarily proficient. Their story is actually referenced in the hit movie The Grand Master, starring Tony Leung and Zhang Zhiyi, Gong which means Gong number 2. That was referring to the daughter, and that was Zhang Zhiyi. The story is completely different, what they say in the movie, what happens in the movie, but they referenced this family, and it was real. Gong Baotian succeeded in passing the method, the training, to his wife and daughter. And what they did with it was apparently very different than what the men did with it, which was treated like a martial art. And so his obsession, his constant reference to the women, these women, and a women's way of doing things over 23 years, finally came together after he passed. Sometimes that happens. And I saw that he actually had given me 2 transmissions. Being a man in the man's world, I was learning the conventional martial art, which is extremely complex. But the women were proficient in martial arts, but that wasn't their reality. They were living in the village, raising children, doing their cottage industries, teaching, keeping the family going. And that was their preoccupation. With the help of many women, these last 30 years, we've been able to recapitulate that dialogue, this different feminine interpretation of Chinese science, culture, and civilization. It's a separate dialogue, and that's exactly what he passed on to me. But a man's reality and a woman's reality of the same system, what they did with it was based on their physiological makeups and temperaments, just difference between women and men. But the attainment, the achievement, was what the sacred pact was. I believe, and I'm sure there are many other examples of this, but I believe that this group, this lineage, this family fulfilled an agreement that women and men have held through eternity, starting with Adam and Eve, so to speak, of what it is to be a man and woman on the planet. And they weren't just psychologically speaking of how things should be. They actually generated content. They generated 2 separate trainings. We have them side by side. I've done a lot of work in replicating it in modern language and terms with the help of the women and men's separate groups that we've succeeded in keeping afloat for 30 years. I knew many people, guys who made their fortune, loved the cultivation, learned the methods. On retirement, handed the bank account, said, wife, it's all yours. I'll see you once in a while. I'm going up to the mountain. The kids are all grown up, things are just fine. And these men just love being hermits. They're living a fantasy that you read about in the historical classics. And what do the women do? They love being at home and cooking and going out with each other and having tea and walk in the park and keeping up with keeping the family going, essentially. And the biggest mistake is to think that, given this scenario, that the men are more enlightened than the women. Somehow we get into this thinking that because the men are meditating more and achieving these different inner feats, that somehow what they're doing is more valuable. No, they're just fulfilling their way. But so little is given to what the women are doing. And I think this is a very important illustration in this village, the Green Mountain Village, because these women were the masters. They taught Gomao Jai more than Gomao Tian did. And they had the time and energy to explain the system in minute detail. What gets me is, where did they get this capacity? And it was not intellectual capacity. It is the ability to take the wisdom that in their body and to also absorb their 5,000 plus years of Chinese heritage and to bring it forward in words. The reframing is the big point here, is that from my point of view of the historian, to see what this group did in Green Mountain, Qingshan village in northeastern China. By the way, it was the province of Confucius and Lao Tzu is Shandong, very famous also for the Hao Han, for their famous heroes, martial arts, and so forth. So not surprising that such a great product had been generated from this region. They fulfilled through their karma this agreement. And what we have is proof of what can be generated, but by cooperation of women and men, each honoring differences and supporting each other. It doesn't mean that every day was hunky-dory. Let's not get this idea that it's all about what's called love, light, and harmony. Okay, no. In fact, that's not the point. The point is that at a higher level, these men and women recognized the specific contributions they could make as women and men in bringing out the best of this civilization's wisdom. The real benefit we have at this time is how well established the baseline is for spirituality, for psychology, for consciousness work. It is so well developed. It is so full. Information technology makes it available. Like we say on our website, elite teachings need to be now brought out more and more and made accessible to the average person, because now the average person has elite needs.